Hello, everybody, and welcome back into another playoff preview show here on the Hockey Writers YouTube channel. And we're previewing the Colorado Avalanche versus the Edmonton Oilers Western Conference Final. Joined in by Jim Parsons and Kerry Collins, both cover the Edmonton Oilers and Colorado Avalanche, respectively. And we just finished two great series between, we had the Battle of Alberta and we had St. Louis Blues against the Avalanche, which turned out to be a pretty competitive series in the end. So now we've got a really good matchup. It's probably one of the best ones I've been waiting for, especially with McDavid and MacKinnon going against each other. And like Jim, you were saying before we started recording, there's a lot of great matchups in this series. So we'll talk about a few of those as we go in this preview here. Just as a little bit of a primer before we get going is the regular season series. Avs won that 2-1. Both wins were shootout and OT. In 3-on-3 OT. So both those things won't happen in the playoffs. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Oilers ended up outscoring them 9-7, even though Avs won the season series, but that's because of the OT and all that stuff. So as for players that, led the way in goals, Kane led with 4 goals. McDavid had 4 assists. So he probably had assists on all 4 of those. And then Yamamoto had 2 goals and 4 points. On the other side, Colorado, Nathan MacKinnon, 3 goals. Rantanen had 2, Nichushkin had 2, and Makar had 3 assists. So pretty much a lot of the main players, were part of the season series. So it's going to be interesting. And then on special teams, Avs were 2 for 13 on the power play. Oilers were 0 for 6. So we'll see if that plays out. The Oilers are, dependent on their power play. So we'll see how that goes. But let's start with the big matchup, what I just mentioned, is Nathan MacKinnon versus Connor McDavid. And by extension, Leon Draisaitl versus Nazem Kadri, because Kadri was a big part of that series against the Blues. So we'll start with you, Jim. What do you think about this matchup? Connor McDavid, Nathan MacKinnon, 2 probably the fastest, most skilled players in the NHL right now.
Yeah, I mean, this is the matchup everybody wants to see, right? Like, this is McDavid, who is doing all worldly things, and MacKinnon, who for the last few years has been kind of the fastest, most skilled guy beyond McDavid, right? So this is kind of what's going to happen here when these two guys play each other. Are they going head-to-head? Are they going to play any defense? Are they just going straight at each other, full board, 100%? Like, that's what everybody wants to watch. And it's going to be very, very interesting to see who outduels the other, right? McDavid so far is winning the matchup, career games versus career games. It's kind of lopsided, but both are still getting their numbers in. So whether that continues in the playoffs or and McDavid's elevation here so far in these series is continued, or MacKinnon comes to play and says, you know what? Yeah, I'm not going to be shown up by this McDavid guy. Like if he comes in there and says, you know what, you're not going to make me look like a fool here. It should be very, very interesting to see what happens. You mentioned Draisaitl and Kadri. When we get to it, I have an actual different comparison between the two because there's so many. I've got at least 6 pairs of matchups here between the Oilers and the Avalanche that I think are very interesting. But that should be a good one too. But McDavid, MacKinnon, I'm going to give the edge to McDavid, not just because I'm an Oilers fan, just because of what McDavid has done so far and how good he looks in these playoffs. But they're both going to get their offense, and it's both going to be fun. It's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, 100%. Kerry, MacKinnon had that end-to-end goal, that ridiculous goal that almost won that series. Didn't end up doing it, but a ridiculous goal nonetheless. And he looked like a man on a mission a lot of those games, except for maybe one. Well, I'd say the last game, he wasn't very noticeable. But what do you think about this MacKinnon-McDavid matchup coming up?
Well, it's been interesting because MacKinnon, really before this year, it kind of struggled. I think in 16 games, he only had like 3 goals against Edmonton in his career. And then in the 3 games this year, I think he had 5 points. McDavid, same thing. McDavid's just on another level right now. The only guy even close to him, it seems like, is Draisaitl. They're like tied in points, and like nobody talks about it. And then the third place guy's Evander Kane. Well, I mean, it's just a lot of trouble here coming in, for Darcy Kuemper and the Colorado Avalanche, especially when it seems like McDavid, they're streaky players, but his burn longer. And it just seems like during these playoffs, he's always been right there. I mean, MacKinnon's been lights out. He's scored, points left and been scoring points left and right. Had that hat trick with the incredible goal and things like that. But I've mentioned this before on some of the other podcasts, just from the standpoint of the 3 regular season games between these teams were so electric, and both those players were so heavily involved in the action that, getting to see them play probably 5, 6, 7 games, every over the course of the next couple of weeks is going to be, pretty exciting, because it seems like this is the wall that Nathan MacKinnon has been waiting to break through his entire career. And he finally did it. And even when they got to that game 5, he looked like, hey, I'm taking this over. They ended up not winning that game, but that was by no fault of his own, especially with the one late goal. But it's just, this is a matchup I was hoping, that happened, I guess, in the Western Conference. And I'm just glad that it's here, because just the way that the regular season shook out for these two teams all year.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Let's move to the other matchup, Leon Draisaitl. And I don't know if Nazem Kadri is going to be against them. Like, Kadri was against a lot of the top players against the Blues. What do you think, Jim, about that potential matchup, Kadri, Draisaitl, or if you have any other matchups you're kind of looking at in this series coming?
Well, I mean, I think the Draisaitl Kadri match would be interesting. For me, it's more of a Draisaitl and Mikko Rantanen, and then an Evander, Kane and Nazem Kadri matchup. To me, that seems more of a dynamic that seems familiar, right? You've got 2 wingers that can really play the game if they're playing together. Draisaitl and McDavid have been doing against Calgary. Mostly because of Draisaitl's injury, right? So he's not been playing center because he's got one good foot. Kadri and Kane are the 2 poop disturbers on the lineup, both who have crazy high-end skill and have had fantastic seasons. Now, Kane's only played half of one, but he was on a 50-goal pace. This is a guy who is leading the playoffs in scoring right now, and Kadri's having an all-world season. Both are UFAs at the end of the year. Both, we have no idea what their situation is going to look like next season, right? That to me is very, very interesting. But Kadri and Draisaitl is a fair matchup too. These are 2 really strong players that the Avalanche and Oilers respectively are going to need to rely on, because this is not going to be a series of just McDavid versus MacKinnon. More has to step up here on both sides for these 2 teams to be successful against each other. So Draisaitl is going to be a guy the Oilers look to, and the questions of his injury are going to be there, but he's played fantastic so far. 17 points in 5 games against Calgary. I mean, that's crazy, right? and Kadri seems to have figured out how not get himself in trouble during the playoff series, and he's not getting suspended. He's doing some questionable things, perhaps, but at the same time, he's staying out of the box for the most part, and not getting himself in real deep trouble. So I don't expect that he's going anywhere. So these 2 guys against each other should be very interesting.
Yeah, that you mentioned Mikko Rantanen. Kerry, he wasn't very noticeable in the last series. He hasn't scored a lot. He's, what do you think about Rantanen's potential being, we'll talk about X factors later, but, he's going to have to step up in this series.
Yeah, he's really struggled. I mean, he didn't score his first goal of the playoffs until I think that game 5. It wasn't the Kadri hat trick game. He scored the empty netter at the end. And I think that is the only goal he scored in the playoffs. He's piled up, 10 assists, but a lot of those came in those first 3 games when they were really racking up goals against Nashville. So, and that just seems like a year ago. But that's a guy that, has become like a regular 30-goal scorer for them when they're playing full seasons and stuff. But to have only 1 goal from him, they've tried different things. They've ran with, MacKinnon, Rantanen, and Nichushkin early. And then they put Landeskog up there. And then they moved Lehkonen up and Rantanen down. So they're trying to get, him to sort of shake out of this, and he just hasn't. And in a series that looks like it's going to be high scoring and close, they absolutely have to have him. That's a big, a big player. And as far as Kadri goes, if he's not getting in trouble against the St. Louis Blues, he's probably not going to get in trouble against anybody, because that's a team that, for the last few years, they've just really butted heads. They've been like siblings. So it's just kind of, he's just playing at a higher level of, whether it's Zen or I'm just keeping my mouth shut, skating back to the bench. I don't know what it is, and we saw what happens when, like we joked about this after that hat trick game, you don't poke the bear. That's a guy that thrives on that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So for him to get out there and, kind of get in the face, but stay out of the box, get in the face of them, but not into the box, is going to be a very big key, just like the last series for both of these teams. That you got to stay out of them. You cannot give either of these teams a power play. The Avalanche power play has been ridiculous the entire playoffs, and that was just sort of what killed them when St. Louis had their, took those games against him. It was power play goals. So you can't give Edmonton those chances either. And that plays into a lot of what Kadri does, because he still finds the penalty box. It's just a matter of not doing it on purpose.
Yeah, that's right. Before we get to the defense, I want to talk about some of the depth. I mean, between the two teams. I mean, Jim, we talked about the Oilers' depth stepping up throughout the last, Battle of Alberta, even though McDavid dominated the points, but some of the guys that actually won, Evander, Kane, Nugent Hopkins, Puljujarvi, guys like that. How important will that be in this series for their forward depth to step up the same way as they've done so far?
Oh, I mean, it'll be huge, right? Like, there's a lot of people are overlooking all of it right now because the McDavid and MacKinnon matchup is so shiny. But for the reality is Nugent Hopkins has 11 points. Gabriel Landeskog has 11 points. Zach Hyman's playing well, and the Chuskin's playing well.
Yeah.
I mean, these are guys, and we talked about it, Kane and Kadri, and these guys have all done their part, right? For the Oilers, a lot of these guys have gone on multi-point game streaks where they've continually scored. It's not like they've just been, okay, here's a good game and here's a good. No, they've continually scored throughout the playoffs, and that has been a huge thing for the Oilers, and they need that to continue. And if guys like Kyler Yamamoto and Jesse Puljujarvi can pop in a few every once in a while, I mean, that's a big deal for Edmonton. Now, I don't know if we're looking at the bottom six, the fourth line for the Oilers hasn't played all that much. They're getting they get way fewer minutes, but if that, can round itself out, if Cassian can have an impact on the season, or Archibald can get in there and forecheck, those guys can do something. Maybe they swing the series one way or the other, but the stars are going to be the stars, and it's those middle tier guys, the Canes, the Hymans, the Nugent Hopkins. If those guys step up and they can beat the middle tier guys of Colorado, I think the Oilers will take the series. And if Colorado's guys do that, I think the Colorado Avalanche take the series.
That's very, very true. And like Kerry, they had JT Compher had 2 goals in the series to win the series, and then Darren Helm scores the winner. So it's like,
everybody had that on in their pool and in their bets. Everybody had Zach Hyman and JT Compher with only goal scorers in that game. But I mean, I totally agree with Jim. I mean, we just talked about Rantanen. He's a must-have guy. I think he missed one of the games against Edmonton in the regular season, but he scored 2 goals against them in the 2 that he played. And that's a guy that absolutely has to get going. If you're going to start leaning on the JT Compfers and Darren Helms, you need a goal here and there from them. They can't be the only guys scoring against a team like this. It's different now. Like, this is a different animal. Sure, St. Louis had plenty of depth, 20 goal scorers on that team.
Yeah.
But this is a different animal. Like you said, the fourth line hasn't played that much. When you're dealing with a guy like MacKinnon for 25 minutes, I mean, that's taking a lot of air out of your sails to be able to go forward. So guys like MacKinnon and Landeskog seem like they're always there. Like, there's games where you don't feel like Landeskog did that much. Then you're like, wow, he had 2 assists, 6 shots on goal, and hit a post. Like, holy cow, like, where did this come from? But he's always there causing trouble in the middle of the net. You're going to get it from those 2 guys. Rantanen's the guy that has to step up, because Nichushkin, as well as he played during the year, he really slowed down too in this last series. And you're just not – those guys just don't seem like they're as reliable. Even Cale Makar, after the 10 points in the 4 games of the first round, he slowed down too. And I mean, from a depth standpoint, it's there. It's just when you look at the depth scoring for Edmonton, guys like Zach Hyman, he was lights out. And the guys that in the similar roles for Colorado aren't doing that right now, or at least they didn't against St. Louis. So they're going to have to change that, or, you know, everybody's happy. Hey, we finally got through the second round, but I don't think anybody that's cheering for the Avs wants him to stop here either. So, but it just seems like Edmonton has more guys that are clicking right now than Colorado does for sure.
Yeah.
And they hung their hat on both these teams. Colorado probably more so hung their hat on the depth, you know, during the season and stuff, but it's just hasn't been there as consistently throughout the playoffs as probably they would have liked, even though they've only lost 2 games.
Well, I mean, we've talked a lot about the offense. I mean, for good reason. There's a lot of great names on both sides, but on the defensive side, these are the guys that are going to have to stop them, or stop one guy on Colorado, who you already mentioned, Cale Makar. I was talking to someone the other day about this, saying that, you know, Edmonton doesn't have a Cale Makar. They're going to have to deal with this guy as an extra forward on every time he's on. He plays over 25 minutes a night or something like that. So he plays a ton. Jim, I want to ask you about how are the Oilers going to have to deal with Cale Makar? I mean, their equivalent defenseman is Darnell Nurse. I mean, he's nowhere near the same offensive ability, but he's their best defenseman. What do you think? How are they going to have to, you know, deal with Makar in this series?
I think you just try to slow him down if you can, right? You can't stop him. I mean, Cale Makar, he had 86 points in the regular season. If he doesn't win the Norris Trophy, I know Roman Josi had a great year, but if Makar doesn't win the Norris Trophy, I'll be shocked, right? Like this is a player who's just going to do what he wants to do, kind of like McDavid, right? He's just going to do what he wants to do, and all you can do is hope to slow it down a little, right? Makar's going to get those opportunities. So I think most teams don't have an answer for him, but the Oilers certainly don't have a defenseman that measures up like that. You mentioned Darnell Nurse. He's dealing with an injury, a core injury that's going to slow him down. He can't be very physical, so he can't really hit. Even if you could try to hit Makar, I'm not sure how successful he'll be. To me, actually, the more interesting matchup might be Evan Bouchard and Cale Makar, because Evan Bouchard, while a very different player, not nearly as fast, not nearly as dynamic, is becoming the Oilers' kind of number one offensive option on that team. And he's scoring like crazy. He's great on the power play. He's got 8 points in 12 games. Not like Makar's got more points, but Bouchard, I think, is going to try to step up to the challenge here, as long as he doesn't make a million mistakes, because he's still really new. I know he's not technically a rookie anymore, but he's as close as it gets without really being a rookie. I think he can kind of step up here, and it'll be interesting to see if he answers the challenge. But I don't think the Oilers are going to have an answer for Makar. It's just a matter of whether or not the whole team together can kind of say, you know what, let's see what we can do just to slow him down, not let him get ahead of steam through the neutral zone, much like the Avs are going to do to McDavid, right? Just don't let him get going. Don't let him get that speed up. Don't let him get kind of worked into just skating everywhere. If you can sort of slow him down, then you'll have a chance here, and hope that he just doesn't kill you every time he's on the ice. But yeah, the Oilers are going to have trouble stopping him just as a group. They need to try to slow him down.
Yeah. I mean, Kerry, we've talked a ton about Makar. I don't think there's more to be said about him, but I want to talk about Sam Girard's injury. We touched on a little bit in the post game, but this is going to be a huge guy missing from their lineup. We talked about, you know, guys like Bowen Byram stepping up, but Girard, I mean, Makar plays a ton, but Girard is an underrated piece of this defense. How much are they going to miss him against the Oilers?
Yeah, especially against a team like this, where that top defensive pairing of Makar and Devin Taves they're always going forward. Like, you know, they're solid defensemen, sure, but they want to get involved in the offense and push the offense. So when you'd have that secondary pairing of, it didn't matter who it was, they'd always mix them around and stuff, but it had been like guys like Eric Johnson and Sam Girard, or even Josh Manson and Sam Girard. Those are some like solid stay at home. We're just going to defend. Good luck getting through here, things like that. And the difference is with that Girard brought is he's a little more dynamic of a skater. He can get out of more trouble, where Eric Johnson's like, you know, the 7 foot tall post in the NBA that's just going to, you know, defend, and, you know, he's just a massive body out there. They don't have that anymore. Byram's a little bit like that, but Byram can get a little bit overwhelmed. He's missed a lot of time. He doesn't play tons of minutes. I mean, I think he probably plays around 10 fewer minutes a game than Makar. It's just, once they get farther past that, now that Girard's gone, you're dealing with guys that they don't really do that much, or they trust that much, like a Jack Johnson, things like that. It's hard when you get those parking cone type guys against an offense like this. And as good as Erik Johnson is, I mean, this is a pretty fast team, and that's where they're going to get in trouble. I don't think anybody's worrying about Makar or Taves. I think they're worrying about once they get into those, farther down, if they get these bad matchups. So the defense has been good. The defense, has been pretty solid throughout the postseason. It's just everybody's is dealing with injuries, but that was a pretty big one. And just from the standpoint of he might not score a ton of points, but Girard's always out there. He played a lot of minutes, and he did a lot of good things. And it's tough losing a guy like that.
Yeah. So we'll see if that plays a big part in this series as it goes. There's a lot of different matchups, and we'll talk about the next one, which is an interesting one, is the goaltending matchup. Mike Smith versus Darcy Kuemper, both former Arizona Coyotes starters in the league. They were both not there at the same time, but they were both starters at one point against each other. So Mike Smith against the Oilers has a ridiculous record, 13-1-5 in the regular season, 2.17 goals against average, 929 save percentage, and 2 shutouts all time. In the playoffs, he's 1-4. Last time they met, he was part of the Flames. In 2018-19, had 3.20 GAA and 917 save percentage, and one shutout in that win. So, against the Avs and the playoffs, those numbers aren't sparkling, but in the regular season, he's ridiculously good. Darcy Kuemper on the other side has the similar numbers in the regular season, never faced him in the playoffs. Played against the Oilers, 10-2-4 in his career, 2.20 GAA and 926 save percentage with a shutout. Now, those are both sparkling numbers for both sides. Starting with you, Jim, I mean, Mike Smith against the Colorado Avalanche. Why is he so good against them? And do you think he'll continue that into this series here?
I'm not sure if the numbers are reflective of his ability against any one team. I think it's just a Mike Smithism. You know what I mean? Sometimes he's fantastic and sometimes he's terrible, right? But so far in these playoffs, he has outbattled his opponent in goal, right? He was better than the LA Kings, Jonathan Quick. He was better than Jacob Markstrom in Calgary, which nobody figured was going to happen. And he could be better than Darcy Kuemper, but he might also make glaring mistakes like he's made in both series, and he might let in stinkers, which he's done in both series. So you don't know, right? What I find very interesting is that he's now playing 2 goalies that the Oilers chased after, right? The Oilers went after Jacob Markstrom before he went to Calgary, and they went after Darcy Kuemper before, in Arizona and before he was traded to Colorado. So it's very interesting because Smith has sort of been, even though the Oilers always talked to him and said, okay, we want to talk to you. We're not ignoring you, but we have things we got to do. So Smith's come in. He's been kind of pissy, in all of these series that he's had because he's been the overlooked guy. And Mike Smith is the most competitive, maybe, person in the NHL. This is a guy who, when push comes to shove, not only does he have the worst short-term memory in the history of hockey, because he can put those stupid mistakes behind him, but he gets up for these matchups, right? So I think when he's facing Darcy Kuemper, he's going to take this as a personal challenge to be better than the guy the Oilers were chasing. So I think it's going to be very, very interesting. And I don't know if his numbers against Colorado or any other team really mean all that much. I just think if the Mike Smith that has been showing up continues to show up, the Oilers are fine. But if he starts to let him down, Kuemper is going to be good. Right? Kuemper has been good. He's a UFA. He's got lots riding on this. I think that it's going to be a very interesting matchup, but I'm curious to see how Mike Smith takes this challenge. If he can really show up again, and if he's decided he's putting all of this on his back and ready to go, I think we see a really decent Mike Smith. We'll see mistakes, but if he can limit those mistakes, he should be just fine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just weird, these numbers for both sides. I mean, numbers made up, but I mean, the confidence to come in against a team he knows he usually plays well against. Yeah. I mean, it can do wonders, right? So we'll see how all that goes. Kerry on Darcy Kuemper. I mean, he's, in the last series, he wasn't the best maybe at times, but he's got great numbers against the Oilers. So he'll have that same confidence coming in. What do you think about him in this series coming up, having to deal with all these sharpshooters like every shift?
He did pretty well against him in the first 2 games. It was the 6-3 game, the last regular season matchup that he wasn't as sharp. I think that might have had to do with a little fatigue. They sort of slowed down a little bit at the end of the year. I think when they realized that Florida's 12-game winning streak was going to get them the President's Trophy. But I think that slowed them down. They slowed down a little bit at the end of the year. But, I mean, it's just that it's always been a tough matchup. I mean, yeah, he's got great numbers and stuff against him. But, I mean, I've mentioned this statistic before. It's like one of my favorite all-time stats is Mike Smith hasn't lost in regulation to the Avalanche since 2008. And it's like, I've lived in 3 different states since then and have had 2 kids. And like, it's just such a ridiculously long time. And like Jim says, is that just a Mike Smith-ism? Is that just some weird streak that he's got going on? And I mean, granted, he's moved more. Mike Smith has lived in more places than me over that time, but the journeyman goalie, it's just, I think there's something to be said for both of these goalies knowing going in, hey, I can slow these guys down. You know, I've shown it. I've shown it this year. I've showed it. Yeah. It's not just some bizarre streak where I haven't played them in 10 years. No, they've done it with like not the greatest teams. I mean, Kuemper played for some not so good Minnesota teams, and then he played for some even worse Arizona teams, and he's still been able to, hold up against them. And I don't know if when the rosters change and stuff, if that just stays in their head with the logo on the front of the jersey. But the thing that Kuemper has got going for him is, even though he struggled a little bit against the Blues in those last couple of games, few games of those series, he just didn't face any shots. They're just doing such a crazy job. I mean, to have 2 games in the second round where you only face 20 shots, I mean, that's a pretty easy night for a goaltender. Yeah. If he can hold Edmonton, or if Colorado can hold Edmonton to 20 shots, which I don't think they're going to have a good chance of doing. If they can do that, this is going to be a short series. I just don't foresee that happening. But people might be talking about, goals, MacKinnon and McDavid. But, I mean, these guys with the numbers they put up outside of that 6-3 game, the other 2 games were ridiculously close and lower scoring. It was kind of like, this could be a tighter series. I'm not talking Dallas and Calgary, but it might be a tighter series than a lot of people are expecting, because no one's talking about these 2 names just because, they're not like you said, I don't think anybody expected him to outbattle Jacob Markstrom, and Colorado's sort of lucked out in both rounds. They've predominantly faced a backup goalie. No Yusei Saros in the first round. Jordan Binnington gets hurt in the second round. So they're sort of skating by here against not the best competition. Now they got to go against the guy that's, kind of had their number for a long time.
One of the things, sorry, Matthew, to cut you off there. One of the things I'm interested in watching, and Jay Woodcroft pointed this out, and Mike Smith has played half the amount of games that Darcy Kuemper has played so far this season, right? Darcy Kemper's played 57 games in the regular season plus playoffs. Mike Smith has only played 28 plus playoffs, right? He mentioned that Mike Smith is just getting up to speed now because he missed the first half of the season. Now, I don't know if that's going to mean that Darcy Kuemper is going to be tired. I don't suggest that that's the case, but I don't think Mike Smith's going to be tired. And at 40 years old, I think he's just getting his wind going, right? So I think that might be an interesting storyline to watch, because I don't know Kemper's past history with all of his regular season games and how many he's played. But this might be a lot of games for him. And for Mike Smith, it's really just not, right? So it'll be kind of interesting to see if anybody gets tired.
One thing about Kuemper too is he's had those injury problems too. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. And that Smith stat must be in the regular season, because he lost in the 2018-19 playoffs, right? And so just as someone commented on that in one of the YouTube channels, and that stats from the regular season, not from the playoffs, because someone mentioned he lost in 2018-19. Okay, so just to correct,
it's still a very good book of business against the Avalanche here that he's been able to put together. And I mean, another thing is, like Jim mentioned, this is the most games that Kuemper's ever played in a regular season, and I think his second to last year with Arizona, or third to last year with Arizona. He played it he was very close. Of course, I think he had 55 games in that season. That was a much, much worse team, than he's playing with now. He's probably faced even more shots that season. I'm not sure on that. It's just, there's something to be said about that. This guy hasn't gone this far into the playoffs.
Yeah.
Ever, he's never been able to do that. So I agree. That's a totally it's going to totally be another interesting storyline to keep tabs on.
Lots of stuff happening. Lots of stuff going on in this series. Let's wrap this up with some X factors just quickly. It could be a player or a situation that you think could be an X factor in this series. Jim, what do you think an X factor could be for the Oilers?
Well, I mentioned it in the series against Calgary, and I'm going to kind of stick to it because I had said many times in that series that the Oilers' biggest mistake against the Calgary Flames in the regular season and in the games that got away from them in the playoffs was Edmonton got caught up in this whole Battle of Alberta. Let's play run and gun. Let's play Calgary style. That's when it hurts them. I think the same thing can be said if they play the Colorado Avalanche. They could probably get themselves into a situation where they go, okay, well, let's just see if we can win this game 10-9. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many skilled players on both sides of this equation that it could become a matchup of let's see who can outscore who. And I don't think that's a good idea for the Oilers, even if you can argue that they maybe have more skilled guys as a collective, right? Yeah. When you've got the top end guys that are as good as McDavid and Draisaitl, and then you've got some other guys that have been really good in the playoffs. I still don't think it's the winning formula for them to get into that series and go, well, let's just try to outscore them. I think the Oilers continue to play the system that has worked for them. Whenever they play it well and whenever they do what Jay Woodcroft has asked of them, they play very good hockey. They ran Calgary out in 5 games, even though that series felt closer than 5 games. It was the Oilers' ability to stay within their structure and their system that helped, right? Even though they got down a couple times, they were always able to fight their way back in. They didn't give away huge leads other than that first game, which was a gong show. I think if they can do what they need to do against a team like Colorado, where they play collectively smart within their system, don't let this become a run and gun game for 60 minutes every night. I think Colorado could take it to them if that happens. And I think the Oilers' defense is weaker than Colorado's in that respect. And I think they could get out of their head a little bit. And that's not good for Edmonton. So if they stay in their structure, they play the system that Woodcroft has implemented since he got there, I think they'll be all right. But if they get out of their heads, they're in real trouble.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's going back and forth against the Avalanche, probably not a good recipe for success. Kerry, what do you think? An X factor? Could be a player, could be a situation. What do you think for the Avalanche?
They got to stay. I mean, well, first of all, they got to stay out of the penalty box. That's the biggest thing, and on top of that, Edmonton's penalty kill in the playoffs has been really good. I think they're 6th in the playoffs, 85%. Like, they were a middle of the road team during the regular season, where on the power play, both these teams are electric. But Colorado, that almost killed them in that series against St. Louis. And this is, a completely different animal just because Ryan O'Reilly kept smoking you and David Perron in the power play, or when you were on the penalty kill. This is, another level up from that too. I just think that the way that the power play has been playing for Edmonton too, if they can't stay out of the box like they did those last few games against St. Louis, that'll kill them. That'll, make it for a quick series for them. But we mentioned this earlier, from a player standpoint, an X factor has to be Mikko Rantanen. He's just got to be better. There's too many other weapons on the other side where, they're, you talk about out shooting people 10-9. I don't even think they want it to be 5-4, I think they want to do what they did in the regular season. They sort of battled this. This is what St. Louis did so well against them, was Colorado jumps out, they hammer you in the first period, and then, try and outscore us, try and outscore us the rest of the way, because we're up 2-0 now. You got to come after us. And St. Louis was able to score first in a lot of those games. Yeah. And if Edmonton can do that, that changes the way Colorado plays. So they need a guy like Mikko Rantanen right away too, to be setting the tone, because he was one of those big guys that would score a greasy goal in the first period just to get him going. Guys like him and Gabriel Landeskog, and he's just flat out not doing that in this series, even though they're moving him around, trying to get him going. If he can just settle in and settle down, because they absolutely need a guy like him to be a threat in this series.
Yeah, Kerry, that's a really good point about the first periods, because in about 65% of the Oilers games, their first periods have been awful, but their record when they score first is unbelievable. Right. Yeah. So the Oilers have had a problem so far in these series coming out strong. And if they can do that against Colorado, a team who traditionally comes out quite strong and then says, okay, try to catch us, that could be very interesting, because the Oilers are going to have to get it in their head that they need to have a really good first period against this team. And they haven't always done that. So if they can do that in this series and keep that record good of, we've got the lead, let's keep it. Let's not give this game away. Then they might be all right.
Yeah, because Colorado scored first in 52 of their 82 games this year and went 43, 4, and 5. I mean, that's a huge advantage. For both teams, if keeping them off the board first, because once they get out, then they're like, okay, same thing. If they lead after the first period, they're 32 and 1, and it's just very hard to overcome that. Where it has been all season for all of their opponents. So if they can keep that going, stay out of the penalty box, and if Rantanen can just do anything, I think that bodes well for them. I mean, those are 3 big keys for them. But, I mean, the biggest X factor has got to be the power play, because they've not looked that good on the penalty kill.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the big thing about starts, because Oilers have, like you said, Jim, have been – some during the season they had problems too, having good starts, and so that's going to be huge for both teams, and it's better to control the game when you score first, and looks like both teams do well when they do that. So let's finish this off with some final predictions on this series. Jim, we'll start with you. What do you think this series will end up as? Who's going to win? What's the series going to end?
I'm not sure that my heart can take 7, but I want 7. I absolutely want to see every game and every minute of hockey these two teams can play against each other. Man, this is such an interesting matchup, because both teams have been disappointed in the playoffs, right? These are two teams that have been expected to do better than they've done. The Oilers and Colorado are maybe at a different timeline. Colorado's been there a few times. MacKinnon's on one more year, and then he's kind of looking at free agency, and the Oilers core is going to be together for a while, but that doesn't mean the Oilers are any less motivated to do this now. And the Oilers have taken a step that and most people didn't expect that they would take this season. So they're on some kind of a run here. There's something in that group that tells me that they are willing to do whatever they need to do to win. Everybody's waiting for Colorado to collapse here, and so far they have not done it. So I don't know. I think this goes 7, and I know the favorites are Colorado, but I think the Oilers are going to take this at 7, actually.
All right. We'll set that. Kerry, what do you think for this series is going to end? Who's going to win? What's going to end that?
I just think I agree that it's probably, I don't know if anybody's sweeping through this series. And as like he says, my heart might not be able to take 7. I want 7. I don't care if anybody's heart could take it. I just want to see these teams play 7 times. On top of what we just mentioned about those hot starts, it's not just the games. I think this game 1 is these first 2 games are so crucial. Looking up what Jim said, when Edmonton leads after the first period, they're 28-1. So it's like that first period is so important. Just like these first 2 games, I think, are vital. And Colorado's looked vulnerable at home. And I think Edmonton, with that last win that they had, was in Colorado, I believe. And I don't think, you talk about them being on a different timeline. That way that Edmonton team is going right now, I don't think they care. And there's been more hiccups than with Colorado just in that last St. Louis series. And I think it's going to go 7 games. And I said like 2 weeks ago to another one of my buddies, I said, if these 2 teams run into each other, I think Edmonton gets them. And I do think Edmonton can beat these guys. Like we said, there's no shootouts, there's no 3-on-3. anything like that. It's going to be who stays out of the box, who gets the early jumps, because both of those teams kind of thrive on that. And if Edmonton can take one of these first 2 games in Colorado, I mean, that puts a lot of pressure. I mean, that's going to put a lot of pressure on them. And they swept past Nashville in the first round, but in that game 2, they probably should have lost. Colorado probably should have lost that game, that overtime game. And, you know, they lost 2 games at home to St. Louis. So this is a team that's been kind of vulnerable. It's just, you know, that top line, those top guys like Landeskog, Makar, and MacKinnon, they forgive a lot of sins. It's just, are they going to be able to do it against a team that, you know, kind of mirrors them in a lot of different ways? So
it's going to be fun.
I mean, I do think Colorado, they're favored for sure. Everybody loves Colorado, but I mean, I think Edmonton can get them. I think it's probably going to go 6-7 games. I'd probably lean on betting towards 7 if I were to bet on the series. And I just think that either of these teams is going to be heartbroken to not get through this series. But I just think that Edmonton has, you know, especially if Draisaitl can stay healthy, guys like Nurse can stay on the ice, things like that. Same thing with Colorado. If they can avoid those injuries and such, they're going to happen throughout the series. But I just, for whatever reason, I just feel like this is Edmonton's series and they're going to pull off an upset here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know I was talking to my dad and he said this should be a Stanley Cup final, not a Western Conference final. So, I mean, this has been, like, it's been great. And, you know, this series is going to be really good. We just had a Battle of Alberta that didn't go long enough. So hopefully this one goes long so we can get more out of it. Even though it did feel like 7 games, how many goals were scored. So it's going to be fun. And we're going to have Jim and Kerry on post game after every game. And we'll break down the games afterwards too. So it's going to be fun tomking about it, depending on what the results are. We'll see. But join us then. For game 1 goes tomorrow. If you're watching this tomorrow, then it'll be today. So Tuesday. Whenever you're watching it,
just say Tuesday.
Say Tuesday. Tuesday. Whenever you're watching it, it's on Tuesday. So it's going to be fun. So join us to the post game shows, and we'll see you in the next preview for the Eastern Conference Final when that gets dealt with in Game 7. So we'll see you then.